I'm trying to figure out whether or not this is the first live-action adaptation of a manga that I've seen. Might be. Alita, Battle Angel. To say that I have been waiting for this movie for a long time would be actually quite a severe understatement. I first heard that James Cameron had gotten the rights to make this as a movie and had begun work on it back when I was in college. So we're talking about 15 years ago, ballpark. So like I said, been waiting a long time. And actually, I was really annoyed at the existence of Avatar for a while because he put this movie on hold in order to start making Avatar. Then I was like, great, Avatar's done. He'll make Battle Angel. And then he said, I'm doing all these Avatar sequels. And the reason we now have the movies, he stepped back to be producer and Robert Rodriguez came on, which could have gone either way. Robert Rodriguez is a director who, when he's on, can deliver some really great stuff. But his working with more special effects heavy stuff, really kind of up and down. Like Sin City came out pretty well, but a lot of the other stuff, not so much. So I was excited. I was nervous. I had a lot of very jumbled up feelings going to the theater to see this. And I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. Overall, I would rate it as a pretty good. Now, I do want to specify the way in which it's pretty good. Because when you say a movie is pretty good, that, in my mind at least, that can mean one of two things. It either means the whole thing just sort of played at a level of, oh, all right. Or it could be that there are some elements that were really good, but there were other elements that weren't as good, and then it balances at about pretty good. This is the latter case. So let's start with what is really good. And the reason why I'm quite happy with the movie, despite some of the faults I am going to end up pointing out, was because what I love about Alita, and I think I'll just call it that, because if I try and do the full title, I'll keep getting mixed up as to whether I'm doing it the order the movie does it or the manga does it, because in the manga it's Battle Angel Alita, the movie it's Alita Battle Angel. I'm just going to call it Alita. So with Alita, the reason that I love it is the character dynamics by and large, particularly when it comes to Alita and Ito. The characters who, in this case, are played by Rosa Salazar and Christoph Waltz. And those characters and their relationship is perfect. I mean, Christoph Waltz was a great get because Ito is the kind of character who, in the hands of the wrong actor, could come across as creepy. And Christoph Waltz never does. You have nothing but sympathy for him. There's humanity just kind of radiating off of him, and it makes it work despite, you know, a few clunky bits of dialogue. But that's an issue with the writing, not with his performance. He has a wonderful performance dynamic with Alita, and he's really good. But seriously, MVP of this movie, Rosa Salazar, who I don't think I've ever seen in anything else before, she's phenomenal. Like, I'm astounded at how good she is in this. And yes, I recognize at least a portion of that is potentially tweaked by CGI animation, but seriously, the amount she is able to convey non-verbally through posture, through looks, through just a pause, like a little movement of her mouth, like it's so alive. I almost said it's so subtle. It's not really, but it's so finely tuned, because when an actor plays a character who is going to be this heavily CGI augmented, you can often end up with one of two things. Much in the same way as what can happen when a character has a lot of prosthetic makeup. Oftentimes you can either end up with an actor who just gets buried under the effects and you don't see much performance, which actually unfortunately does happen with some of the supporting characters, or you end up with someone who is trying to force their acting through the effects, and they end up being over the top and campy and ridiculous. She rides the line perfectly. Everything comes through, but it does not feel forced or over the top. She was mesmerizing. Like, instantly, the instant her character opens those big eyes, which I got used to very quickly, she communicates so much just with a look, just with an expression, just with taking a pause. She conveys so much thought process, and it's real. I'm serious. This is an astounding performance, and I really feel like it's not going to end up getting the recognition it deserves. Partly because of the CGI augmentation, partly because the movie's not being as successful at the box office as I think probably I'm going to end up wishing it was. But no, she carries this movie handily. As far as the other performers go, I don't know the actor who plays Hugo, who's sort of the teenage boy, somewhat romantic-y interest. I'll avoid spoilers as best as I can. If I think I have to go there, I'll warn you. Don't worry. So Hugo's quite good. Again, he's got really good chemistry with Alita. So that's the main thing that needs to work there. You've got Jennifer Connelly and Mahershala Ali as supporting characters, and I mean, they bring a little bit because they're both good performers. I think Mahershala Ali in particular, brings a little bit extra to playing the role of Vector, but there isn't a lot to those parts. I mean, there isn't really a lot in the manga either, so I don't want to be like, oh, they got it wrong. Well, no, because the manga very much focuses on Alita and Ito, as the film does as well. I mentioned that there are some performances that kind of get lost in the effects. I think the big one is Jackie Earle Haley, who plays sort of this, I forget what they called him, because some of the names are a little bit different from what I'm used to from the manga. So I keep forgetting what they called him, but he's big, hulking thing, and just he gets buried under the effects. He just doesn't come through. His performance is too subtle, it's too naturalistic, and it doesn't read. Especially considering that for some of the moments to be as cathartic as they are intended to be, he needs to be more intimidating than he is, and part of it is that. A much better performance from a supporting sort of CGI augmented character is Ed Skrein, playing one of the bounty hunters. He's quite good. I mean, I like him anyway. He has a very strange kind of charisma to him. It's hard for me to put my finger on, but I find him really hard to look away from. I've always liked him ever since saw him back on Game of Thrones as the original Dario Naharis. He was way better than the second guy they got too. Anyways, so he's quite good, and the effects in general are very good. And I suppose that brings us to Rodriguez and what he brings to this. He brings a fantastic flow to these action scenes, and also just great. The whole thing looks great, but again, it's kind of bolstered by Alita's performance because, she's the way that she looks, stepping out from waking up for the first time and stepping out into a city built on garbage, but looking around with such wonder, and you can, with no words, you can tell from her performance that she's seeing the beauty in this, and it's shot in a way that, yeah, I guess it is all kind of cool. But then also at later times when it needs to feel dark and dingy and dangerous and dirty, it absolutely does, while still feeling like the same place. And Robert Rodriguez does great work in terms of the action scenes. The pacing of them is great. The choreography of them is great. The way that they're shot, it never gets too fancy, and there's some very hectic action, but I always knew what was going on. The hits, even though it is ultimately 9 times out of 10, it's pixels hitting pixels, the hits felt impactful. They felt like they hit. They felt like they hurt. And that was a big thing. And given how action heavy this is, that's a big thing that needed to work, and it absolutely does. And I think in an odd way, it kind of makes me annoyed that Rodriguez spent so long sort of basically working out of his garage. You know, a lot of stuff that he did was he built his own sort of personal special effects studio, which is why a lot of his special effects were so cheap and wonky, but it gave him complete control. So to see him work with, you know, basically special effects a la James Cameron and realize, oh God, you know, if you hadn't like sort of insisted on being able to do everything in your backyard, we could have gotten some amazing looking stuff out of you. But I'm glad we got it now. But there are some issues. Like, the main problem with the thing is ultimately narratively. Because if you're familiar with the manga, it's pulling bits and pieces from about the first 3 volumes or so of the manga. So the result is a bit of an undisciplined story. It doesn't focus in as much as it really kind of needed to in order to land, strictly speaking, as a narrative. The result is almost picaresque in terms of how it feels like little samplings of things, but none of them are the main thrust of the story. Because we've got stuff worked in here with Alita's past and history and origins, which is, speaking personally, is the first thing I would have cut. I mean, also because, like, I find it the least interesting part of the manga, too. Like, I am fascinated by what she's doing now. Where she came from, I honestly don't really care. So anytime and thankfully it doesn't eat up a lot of screen time, but anytime that comes up, like, I zoned out a bit. But in terms of overall pacing, so, like, the first 3 volumes of the manga, again, trying not to get into spoilers on it, deals initially with Alita becoming a bounty hunter. Second volume deals heavily with her relationship with Hugo. And third volume deals primarily with the sport of motorball. So this has all 3 of those. And what I mean, like, what it feels undisciplined. So they have Alita register as a bounty hunter, which is something, you know, she said she wanted to do. So it's not like it comes out of nowhere. But she does that. There's an action scene not long after that. We never actually see her hunt a bounty. Like, ever. Not even once. Not even a montage of it. And next thing we know, she's in tryouts to compete in motorball. So that's what I mean when I say there's a lack of discipline, and they were probably trying to cram in a few too many narrative threads for this thing. I think the motorball was something to push to a sequel. Of course, I say that, but at the same time, it's very obvious that they were trying to set up some stuff for the sequels, largely having to do with allusions to a bigger villain that is ultimately going to be dealt with later. Although I will say we had had glimpses of this character at a few points, and I had not recognized who was playing the character until the very end of the movie, and I went, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But unfortunately, unless the overseas box office really blows it away, this is probably not going to get a sequel. So it does annoy me that it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. Whereas I think, either taking an ending note more from the first volume or the second volume of the manga, either more sort of the triumphant warrior or a more kind of melancholy tone, either one of those would have worked, but it tries to have both at the same time whilst also setting up a sequel, and it doesn't quite pull together. It doesn't fall apart, but sort of after about the halfway point, the narrative starts to lose steam because it kind of loses focus a bit, and it's just it just didn't know which bits of these 3 volumes to trim out, because I suspect the reason that both the bounty hunting and the motorball are in there is for the variety of the action scenes, and they are both great action scenes. Do not mistake me on that, but I don't know if from a narrative perspective if it was worth it for that. So whether or not this is worth it for you to rush out and see in the theater, or whether it's a bit more of a wait to watch it at home, I think depends on what elements you really want to work. If you want good, strong main characters, which I do believe this has, their dynamic is great. I I found the relationship between Ito and Alita to basically be perfect. That was exactly what I wanted out of this relationship. So I'm really happy as a result of that. The action's really good. But if you are narrative focused, if you need the story to sort of end in a satisfying and like everything feels complete kind of way, you may end up walking away a little bit irritated. And I don't think that's a spoiler to say that it just kind of, it doesn't really end so much as it stops. But not like in a hard to be continued way. You know, it's not Matrix Reloaded or anything like that. But you know, that unfortunately is a bit of a bummer that it loses steam as it goes along. But I still really enjoyed it. I'm glad I saw it. So, Alita, Battle Angel, you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff to do down there as well, because there's buttons, links, Patreon. Hey, I appreciate it. Plus other stuff to check out besides. Give it a look. It's all down in the description, or don't. That's okay too, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.